At the turn of the 20th century, William J. McFarland returned home to Indian Creek with the intent to purchase lumber rights in the immediate area. Within a decade, his plans for a small mill operation would expand into an extensive line of rail measuring 22 miles into the Laurel Highlands. Today, very little remains of this line, at least to the untrained eye. The Indian Creek Valley has become a typical image of Rust Belt America. Very few of the businesses have survived to the 21st century, but the entire grade can easily be traced. You just need to know where to look. So allow this video to serve as a part history lesson and part travel guide to retracing the Indian Creek Valley Railroad. The railroad's southern terminus was always a small community once known as Hampton, wedged within a small canyon where the Indian Creek had its confluence with the Youghiogheny River. This valley was paralleled at the turn of the century by the Western Maryland and the Baltimore Ohio. Being so close to this major artery allowed for a 4-mile short line to be proposed between Hampton and Mill Run for the vast tracts of lumber. Several lumber companies had already formed earlier that decade, anticipating the construction of the line. But while the railroad was chartered in 1902, construction did not commence until another 4 years. By the time the first segment was finished, plans were already made to expand beyond Mill Run to Rogers Mill, where vast second growth timber awaited. A large circular sawmill was erected down at Hampton, where the timber was cut up and put on flat cars ready to be taken by the Baltimore Ohio to Pittsburgh. Either because of its proximity to the creek or the name of the railroad that originated there, the town soon took its famous name of Indian Creek. McFarland had 25 homes erected for its 200 populace, which is easier said than done considering the terrain. Eventually, the valley proved too constricting for the rapidly developing operations of the lumber mills and railroad, which would eventually be shifted further north as the line progressed construction. Today, only a wooden canyon remains of what was once the base of early operations for the ICV. If one does struggle up the steep slope, they may find some foundations left over, but it's highly unlikely. This is now the terminus of the biking trail that now occupies the railroad grade. One thing that does remain, however, is the Free Arch Viaduct that became a staple of the Baltimore Ohio. Today it is used by CSX. The secondary bridge spanning the Indian Creek also remains. When the first 4 miles open, the ICV has only one Climax B locomotive to their name. Unusually numbered after the year of its construction, it was perfect for hauling timber out of the mountains. But the new line also brought attention to a tranquil spot at a bend in the creek called Hutchinson. A small picnic park was erected sometime in 1908 that gave the area the new name of Killarney Park. Many would come out of the cities and take the short ride from Indian Creek to this new park, where a pavilion and snack stand was established. The park expanded over the years and eventually morphed into a Christian camp, which still exists to this day. Just a few years ago, a new bridge was established for the park, and much of the trail from here to Indian Creek has been smoothed out. A branch line spurred down the Mill Run as McFarland turned his attention to the vast timber just a few miles up Indian Creek.
The angle of that.
The railroad had to cross Indian Creek twice in order to access the vast second growth forest of the Rogers Mill region. This area had in fact already been cultivated for lumber back in the 1840s for a blast furnace in the region, but second growth timber had replenished the forest. The only problem was the steep terrain. This led to McFarland establishing what has been described as one of the most unusual railroad operations in the state. A standard gauge branch line spurred off following Buck Run until the terrain became too treacherous. Then, a narrow gauge line was laid that zigzagged in switchbacks up toward the top of Laurel Hill. McFarland had owned an older narrow gauge Climax from a short-lived operation north of Hutchinson, shipping it to Rogers Mill to be used in these new timber operations. The timber had to be transferred over 2 different gauges to 3 different locations, and all achieved by gear locomotives. This operation soon became known as the high fly due to the tendencies of the brakes to easily wear out, sending the trains hurtling off the tracks. Today, very little exists of the Rogers Mill operations, but within Rogers Mill lies one of the last original structures of the ICV, and I was determined to locate it. I think I'm on the main line in Rogers Mill, and if I'm right, there should be a trestle down here. If I'm wrong, well, this may be the last you ever see of me. I mean, that's a promising sign. I think this might be it, because the trail has not been made yet, which means we're kind of trespassing. And there is something. And if I'm wrong, I probably should see the trestle from here. But I think this is the trestle. Yeah. There it is. Trestles to Rogers Mill. Eventually they're going to make the trail, and it'll continue the whole way down past Normalville, down through the Christian camp, and it'll connect into the Youghiogheny. The only thing that sucks is you'll never be able to connect it to the Youghiogheny Passage because it's on the other side of the Yough. But here it is. Original railroad bridge. Still here. By 1912, all the lumber operations in Rogers Mill were forced to close. By 1910, the timber operation showed signs in taking over the entirety of the Indian Creek Valley. If this was to be achieved, central facilities were going to be needed. All trains to this point were originating from Indian Creek, being forced to siphon water directly from the stream. Number 1908 was still the only mode of power for the main line and was no longer up to task. It was ultimately sold and its profits used to purchase 2X Pittsburgh and Lake Erie 460s and later a large 2-day-0. For the increase in operations, a water tank was established at Indian Head. The Back Creek Hollow contained a vast stash of untouched timber. A mile-long spur was constructed to access it. It would flourish begin in 1917 when Daniel Zimmerman purchased the holdings of the Indian Creek Lumber Company. He would have the now single-band sawmill from Indian Creek moved up to Indian Head. But Zimmerman's interest was more in his partial share of the railroad. Coal had been a growing commodity on the line around 1912, but Zimmerman shifted most of the railroad's focus to coal by the 1920s. A large tipple was erected at Indian Head, accessing coal from the mountain across the creek. Indian Head rapidly developed, with new coal company houses erected on the south side of town, opposite the old mill homes. However, much of the town was devastated after a fire broke out from the local company store. Today, patches of the town remain. A new, larger store called Resch's was established sometime after the fire and became the main business throughout the latter half of the century, until it too burned. Little stub track that went across Indian Creek was somewhere over there, probably for the mines that were up there over the hill. So it gets a little confusing, but I believe the main line actually would have curved through here and then went into the yard over here. And what is now part of the trail, that was a siding track that split off from the main line and went into the yard. When we first walked in, it actually was elevated several feet off the ground, so there'd be a little bit of wooden ramp you come up, and right here, roughly in this area, would have been the cash registers right here. There had been a wall over here, and I remember in the final years, I actually had photos of various Steelers. I think maybe Jerome Bettis was on it. I think they had visited the store one time or something like that. I distinctly remember that. And going all the way down there, see down there, right over here would have been actually the hardware section. It was kind of like its own separate room. The cool thing about Resch's was the building just kind of grown over the years, so every section felt different. You had your produce section going down the middle, then you had your hardware, which you had to step down into this other little room over here. Then you had like your medical area and everything. Everything was its own little separate area that they had to add on, I assume, on the store over the years it grew. All gone now. Alright, for my final guess, I'm going to say that the right-of-way you're seeing over there is probably the main line. And they moved the trail a little bit over for convenience. So you can clearly tell there's a right-of-way there from some point. The path cuts through. And then that would have gone across into the yard here with the big tipple. And I'm gonna say that the trail for this little segment actually uses the Back Creek branch, which crosses right over here and then would have veered up over Back Creek. Are we happy with that? Is that a good hypothesis for everybody? My brain's hurting. That massive tipple was stretched clear across what is now the fairgrounds behind the fire department. And you can see one of them piers now holds up on the light poles. And I think up till a few years ago there actually was another one of them over here, but they must have torn it down to make way for the park. One massive tipple brought the coal down from the mountains over here. And you can still see here, which what now is supposed to be a ballpark, still see some bits and pieces of the bony piles that used to be standing around here. The community of Sagamore sprung up as a result of the Sagamore Coal Company digging into the mountains with the Big Chief mine. It was rather inaccessible except by rail, with only one wooden bridge crossing Indian Creek. Today, virtually nothing remains of the town save for a lone residence. If one looks closely, they can still see the slag pile in existence across the valley. During the logging days of the ICV, the trains passed the confluence of Champion Creek and proceeded toward further timber operations north on the line. But by 1918, a narrow but lucrative coal seam was discovered in the area. The Cooper's Company purchased the land along Champion Creek and quickly began to lay out a town. Unsure what to name their rapidly developing patch community, the names of the two owners, Richard Mellon and H.W. Croft, were combined, hence the community's name of Melcroft. By 1921, the community had well over 100 dwellings, a company store, and even a hospital. The Melcroft mines became one of the primary reasons the route of the ICV survived far longer than most lumber lines. The 23 coal mines in the valley were producing until the very last one of Melcroft was shuttered in 1969, which is impressive considering the vein was just 43 inches, and rather difficult to mine. The mines in Melcroft were notorious for being very tight to work in and soaked from groundwater. Today, it is not uncommon to have sinkholes occur in the area. So the spur that we're on presently would have head up to what was known as Melcroft number 2, one of the past towns in the region, and one of the main mines that were industries along the Indian Creek Valley Railroad. It appears from here you could actually connect over to the ATV trail. This man-made marsh would have been the site of all the mining operations all the way up the hollow up there. And he was part of the patch town still in existence today, just across. Now the siding for Melcroft had to cross the Indian Creek, which meant one of the larger trestles of the railroad would have to be built just for this mining siding. Recreation on the line was not exclusive to Killarney Park. Just north of Melcroft, a small picnic grove was established on the opposite side of Indian Creek. It later flourished to be a popular camping site due to its shady proximity. Known as Maple Grove, it came to include a clubhouse and several activity facilities, the centerpiece being a large swimming pool with slide and diving boards. The skating rink in particular was of attraction to the teenage crowd of the Indian Creek Valley.
On Friday nights, I think, and Saturday nights, I'm back down to the skating rink there. I was an official skate boy, so we get in for free. In other words, you carried a skate key. Because when people didn't have their own skates, you'd have to use this little key looking thing, turn to adjust so they fit on your shoes.
The campground of Mountain Pines overtook the Maple Grove site. The original Maple Grove facilities can still be seen on the map. By 1910, new train facilities were needed to be constructed somewhere more central on the line, as having every train originate out of Indian Creek would only cause delays. As such, the railroad moved its operations to Champion, Pennsylvania, where an engine house was erected. By the time Champion was operational, the main line would see 4 passenger trains daily with an additional regular freight. So I'm standing on what would have been the main line, and there would have been a side switch over here. You can see some of the ruins of the platform. And this, up until the final days of operation in the 70s, was where lumber from the old Babcock plant would have been offloaded, put on box cars, and sent the whole way down to, well, wherever it needed to go, eventually Connellsville. And the lumber plants are still in operation today. They're owned by different ownership, not Babcock anymore. The main line looking down. We're going to head right over there, and there's woods over there. There's actually a bridge. This is now proceeding on the Indian Creek alignment, heading toward Melcroft. Jones Mills was the northern terminus of the ICV. Here a Y was erected so trains could be turned around for their return trip to Indian Creek. This trestle was just a few feet east of the Y and provided access to the further lumber operations north beyond Jones Mill. Looking up the hill where you see that open spot in the middle, that's where Matthews Mill would have originally stood. Although the ICV's jurisdiction ended at Jones Mill, an additional 4 miles of rail to the headwaters of Indian Creek was laid. In 1908, the Blair brothers were looking to try and salvage their timber operations on Laurel Ridge. They had tried to operate a siding off of the PWS near Somerset, but the grade proved to be too treacherous for their lone shay. Hearing of the expanded ICV, they moved to the other side of the ridge and set up shop in what became known as KREGAR. Their facilities quickly grew into one of the most expansive along the ICV. A large sawmill with 2 circular saws and long ponds were erected. The brothers also purchased their own independent fleet of flat cars to bring the cut timber down for the mountain. At the very end of the line on Laurel Hill, a 4-foot vein of coal was discovered, increasing the success of the Blair brothers. To be honest, I'm unsure how many different branch lines spurred off in the KREGAR area, as the Blair brothers developed so quickly and rapidly. But by 1927, the timber had been stripped clean and their operations ceased. Here the Blair line emerged from a tunnel underneath present-day Route 31, crossing Route 130 and making its way on the grade. Well, I was hoping it wasn't going to be this muddy. Oh well. For history. Most of the 4-mile grade can be retraced as a hiking trail through Forbes State Forest. This open field would have been one of the locations of the sawmills along the Blair line. If you look closely in the brush, you'll be able to see the Blair line grade as it makes its crossing over 130. Here we're looking south on the Blair line grade as it crosses 130 in what would have been known as Horner's Mill. From here, the line climbed up into the mountains till its terminus somewhere about a mile uphill. This is the end of tracks for the Indian Creek Valley Railroad. The lumber operations on the ICV died out by 1915. The coal operations became the dominant force, allowing the Baltimore Ohio to purchase the rights of the line in 1927. The B&O continued to operate the ICV as a branch line to Champion until 1968, when the entire line was abandoned. Today, very little remains, but fortunately, the entire route is now the basis of the Indian Creek Valley Trail, and it can be easily accessed and traversed.